right. Welcome to the Pipeline and People podcast powered by Versorix, the show where boutique firm leaders trade less admin for more advisory. Each week, we share actionable tactics to keep your client pipeline full and your team performing at its best. I'm your host, Jaden Parisi. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Shelley Smith, founder and CEO of Premier Rapport, a consulting firm dedicated to reshaping workplace culture and maximizing organizational performance. Shelley, welcome. Could you kick us off with a quick look at your background and how Premier Rapport got started?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'll try to keep it short. I've been around for a few decades now. I'm proud to say and afraid to say, but I've been in this workspace my whole life and didn't really call it all things workplace culture until probably about 20 years ago, way before workplace culture was probably even a common word. But I actually grew up in an entrepreneurial home, didn't realize that the hustle was real back in those days. And then worked for Marriott Corporation for quite a few years and on the franchise side. And then I decided it wasn't about the brick and the mortar. It was always about the people. It was always about the workplace culture. And then I got into this space and created my own processes and the methods that I've been using for all these years. The birth of the culture curation certification and the culture inquiry and all things workplace culture came into play. So myself and the team work with leaders around creating their internal universities, protecting their culture, defining their culture, executive coaching, assessments, and it's just a ton of fun because you never know who you're going to talk to. Every industry, regardless of size, has this workplace culture thing, either helping them or hurting them. I love being in that space.
Amazing. I saw that you have predictive insights in your LinkedIn header. Part of my interview process at my first job out of school was taking that test, and I tested as an adapter. How do you leverage PI and
Oh my gosh, I love everything Predictive Index. I actually, when I started the business, I originally had bought a franchise and they used DISC. I used it for a year and I actually sold the franchise and I was reintroduced to Predictive Index in a completely different way and just fell in love with it. The simple way that you take the assessment and then all the science behind it. And it nails people. It's freaky accurate. It nails people. So I'm a captain. And so even as an adapter, you lean into one of the four kind of overarching work styles. I don't know if you know which you lean into, but I use Predictive Index with every client in some way, shape, or form, literally every day. It's just a part of my natural vocabulary. And I think all assessments are great as long as they're scientifically proven. And I love Predictive Index because of that consistency and reliability, the ease of use and the application. So that creation of building awareness that gives you insights in order to make, better decisions.
How do you describe the work you do when a client says, we want better culture, but we don't know where to start?
Well, first of all, I remind them they have a culture. They just maybe can't define it. Or they have a culture and it's not what they wanted it to be. So often people think it's this organic, inorganic, you can't really touch it. You can. It shows up in your results. So two people right now, we're already starting to create our own little culture of how we lean in and conversate. So I remind them it does exist. And then I pull them into what do you want it to be? And then we find out what is it that's actually happening. So the living versus the written. And then from there, the conversations tend to go marvelously because all of a sudden people go, oh, yeah. And if they push back, I remind them, well, there's probably consistent ways that you decision make, that you collaborate, that you innovate, that you communicate. And then they start, yeah. I was like, you're starting to define and talk out loud what your culture is and if it's actually what you want it to be.
Yeah, makes sense. One of our other topics that we've had a few episodes on is all about wearing too many hats in this space. So I like to ask everyone, what's your current split between like coaching, assessments, training, delivery, sales? What's taking up most of your time?
Well, I personally like balance. That's that captain in me going back to the Predictive Index piece. So my business is predicated on 4 different buckets. It is the leadership development bucket, if you will, that creation of internal universities, the succession planning piece, very deliberate around defining, understanding what the culture is, which leads to some of the other buckets. And then keynote speaking, I do a lot of keynote speaking as well, conferences, different associations, retreats, and those sorts of things. And then the behavioral assessment piece, they all kind of intertwine with one another. I like to work with clients and go deep. So depending on where they start, usually one leads to another piece. So we actually pride ourselves in being very holistic and making sure that we're able to really yield some really long lasting results. So if we start with predictive index, it leads into the executive coaching and all the training and development, and of course, the impact on the culture. If we start with the culture inquiry, well, of course, it's going to lead into, hey, you really need to have a behavioral assessment. You really need to create your internal universities, and probably some people need to have executive coaching. If you start with executive coaching, it's like, hey, we really need to start with some assessments to understand who it is that we're working with. And then from there, it usually leads out to teams. And then from there, we usually find gaps, which leads into the leadership development, which of course is an impact on the culture. So those three pieces kind of lock and load together beautifully and intentionally. And then, of course, keynote speaking is when people want to come in and say, hey, can you talk on XYZ topic, which typically is around the culture. And then for there afterwards, they're like, oh my gosh, do you do consulting work? And yes, I do. And so we have been very intentional about our design of our model and how everything really syncs together. So percentage of time that our predictive index kind of comes in is probably 30 or 40%. And then the rest of it is very dedicated on the culture and the leadership. But again, one bleeds into the other. So I hope that makes sense.
Quite effective. Is
But
that all part of your certified professional culture curator?
yes. Yes. Yeah. When I created that certification, it was meant to, well, first of all, I realized that there was a method to my madness that I had done all these years, even going back to my Marriott days. And I documented it. And I was like, oh my gosh, every time I go into a team, to a hotel, to a region, I start with this process. I always analyze first. And then I move into creation, and then I curate it. And I always talk about the employee empathy mapping. And so that's absolutely how all that stuff was birthed and documented. And then somebody said, you should certify people on that. And I was like, that's a great idea. Yes, I should. And then that's how it was created.
Okay, diving a little bit more into some of the trends that we're seeing, are you seeing pricing pressures in the consulting world, especially for culture or people-focused services?
Yeah, actually in a good way. Pre-COVID, it was a bit of a battle to get people to understand that culture, for example, wasn't a nice to have. It's a you have it whether you realize it or not, so let's help it work for you. So beforehand, I would have a few people come to me naturally, and then the natural ones we would end up working together because they got it. And then there was some people when you're out and about networking, what do you do? I'm a workplace culture, I'm a culture curator. Well, what is that? Oh, that's a nice to have. Post-COVID, everybody realizes that culture is important. It is not a nice to have. And so it's been pretty easy to kind of lean into that and to drive the results. So from a pricing standpoint, the shift has happened that this isn't a luxury and an expense where actually it's costing us more if we don't spend and focus on the internal, for example, the internal universities. It costs us more to send people out one by one than it is if we actually embed this inside of our own team, our own culture. It helps us with attraction because everybody wants to have development when they get in. It's like when they come in, what do I need to do to move up? It's one of the first questions that are asked. So it checks the box of attraction. It checks the box to be able to retain people. It checks the box of succession planning, and it checks the box of total engagement, which means it's checking the box for institutional knowledge of effectiveness and efficiency, which means it's checking the box for profitability. So the light has come on to many, many, many organizations that it wasn't there before. So I would say that there's an uptick of people being willing and open to have an investment on a consultant who actually puts a part of their consultancy agreement, the return on the investment, which I do. I always include in there, what are we going to measure? When do we want to see the needle move? What's an acceptable needle? Okay, great. Then would it be worth for you to invest in this from a risk perspective in order to get that? And the answer is always yes. So it's a good thing. It's a good space. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Everybody knock on wood.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I talked to someone that owns a very, very similar firm to yours a couple days ago, but he's positioned as a DEI and organizational development. And he was saying the complete opposite. He's like, there's a big backfire on DEI
Good for
initiatives right
DEI.
now, but like he does focus on the culture. That's his whole thing. So it's interesting to hear that different perspective. Do you do any DEI stuff within your?
Yes, and but I have always been in the space of inclusion, so to be seen, valued, and heard. And I've always been in space of, are your policies equitable? What is your stance on inclusion? What is your stance on diversity? What does that mean to you? Way before all things George Floyd and then some. And so almost became I'm going to jump on the DEI bandwagon, and then adding the A on the end as well, or the B on the end. So no, because if organizations that was already a part of their value proposition for an employee, all of this conversation didn't ruffle them because they were always doing the right thing to begin with. The ones that jumped on the bandwagon just to be jumping on the bandwagon and said that DEI was all the same thing missed the boat to begin with. And it actually makes me crazy and my skin crawl when someone equates a hire around diversity and they put it in the DEI. D, E, and I are separate things, and affirmative action is not diversity. And so it actually makes me crazy. So those are the people who I find are, you can say, blissfully ignorant and just not doing it for the right intention. So because I've always used that word inclusion around everything that I've done, that the I in the DEI has always been a part. And so I find that I connect with people and people connect with me because they understand the value of that. So we could probably spend hours and hours on that, but that's my 2 cents. It makes me crazy when people pull it into one
I
place.
feel like they do a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of already mentioned this, but what's changed in the past few years about how companies kind of perceive the value of culture?
Oh, yeah, dramatically. And again, to me, the pivotal point absolutely was, I won't say March of 2020 during the initial shutdown, but I would say probably 6 months into that, when some company CEOs absolutely froze and they didn't know how to handle a remote workforce, and they felt like there couldn't be a culture. And what they realized is they just needed to shift how they communicate, how they collaborate, how they do work. So I saw a lot of, at that point, perceived successful CEOs actually lose their entire company because they weren't able to do the shift. And then I saw ones that were kind of mediocre, and those leaders really got it. And they leaned into it and they understood that this was the moment to innovate and to really bring the team in. And those companies grew incredibly much quicker from a top line revenue and profitability because they leaned into it as an opportunity instead of shutting them down. And so now, so that was a huge shift. And now it's that balance between not mandated to come in, not staying 100% remote, or maybe you are, into the hybrid, and what does success hybrid look like? The companies that still struggle with what to do are the companies that say that they're hybrid and require people to come in 2 to 3 days a week or 4 days a week, but they don't make everybody come in the same days. And so now you're asking me to come in, and I'm still sitting on in a cubicle, and I'm still on a Zoom call. Why am I here? No one else is here. And so I'm still finding a lot of companies not really understanding how to lean into the beautiful pieces. And when you're going to have everybody in the office, you've got to be deliberate around the team building then and the communication, because if not, you're falling flat and you're losing employees, and they're disengaged. So that was the before trend, the quick after trend, and now the stumbling that I'm finding people. My latest book, deemed Thirsty, and it's all about the dehydration of workplace culture. It really goes to the core of all of this. Is I do find companies and individuals are literally dehydrated on how do we do and what do we do when we do this thing working together. So my goal and my mission is to get people rehydrated around all things workplace culture.
Nice. Just backing up to something you said there, what's a common kind of characteristics or theme of the people that did it well?
Vulnerability. Leaders who said, that's a great question, I don't know. Leaders who said, I don't know, we've never been here before. Can we figure it out together? Leaders who said, what do you all think we need to do? So really leaning into the openness of what they knew and what they didn't know, and being open, vulnerable, authentic, If they made a decision and the decision didn't land right, that they owned that. If they made a decision and it did land right, they gave the kudos to their team. So vulnerability, absolutely. Authenticity, absolutely. And ego side, that they don't know it. None of us know everything. And
Yeah,
so the sooner you learn to work with others, the better off you are, and that you're open. You kind of throw the title out the door in order to get the work done. So those are definitely the consistent themes. The true is to the opposite. The ones that froze, the ones that didn't communicate, the ones that didn't have the answers but acted like they had the answers and didn't say anything. The ones that were publicly shamed, and there's a few of them that sent emails to lay people off instead of, having the right
yeah,
communications. I mean, we also saw those horrible, horrible, and they made the news. You hear about the ones who really made the oops. You don't necessarily hear about the ones who did all the right things. So those are the
yeah.
trends on both sides.
For sure. Okay, getting into kind of the main topic of today's call is the pricing trends.
Mhm.
If we followed you through a typical client engagement, where does the real value reveal itself? Like I think I saw X ROI somewhere on your LinkedIn profile.
Yep. Yeah,
Where
and
do you
that
see
for
that?
me is on the minimum side. The typical where we start to see it immediately, two things. If you start with predictive index, the typical is on the pre-hire. The immediate time is the time that the recruiters and the hiring managers get back because that tool allows you to immediately focus and to zoom in on who you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody to swim all day versus somebody to climb a tree all day, you know where to start with the dolphins and you know where to start with squirrels, so to speak.
I like
Clears so return on time, so time back. And when you take the amount of time that people spend going through resumes, pre-screening calls, and the interview levels, that's a lot of time and a lot of payroll. So that's typically the first if you're starting with the predictive index piece. Starting with the culture inquiry and or the leadership development universities, then we're starting to get more into the turnover and the retention and the profitability. So when I work with manufacturing clients, typically within the 9 month to 6 month window, the return on the investment is coming because the errors and omissions, so to speak, are going down. The waste on the product line, on the plant floor, of whatever it is that you're manufacturing, starts to go down because you've been focusing in on communication, collaboration, and I say what right looks like around the values of when we work together. I define workplace culture of how we do what we do when we work together. And it's built every single day. It's not built in one day, but every single day. So those take a little bit longer to start to see the ROI, although 90 days to 6 months isn't that far. But then you get a huge, very quick, impactful return. So again, I'm all about here's the pricing in order to fix. And I call it, here's the investment. So I shift the mindset. If you were to invest in this and you were to get this back within this time frame, does that add value to your world? And if the answer is yes, we proceed. I have had a couple of clients that were tougher and I gave them guarantees and said, you're going to get this back minimum in this time frame. And if you don't get it, you don't pay me anything. And so for that, I do go in because hopefully I don't come across as arrogant, but I'm very confident in what it is that the team and I do. Listen, I have my owner's hat on too. I don't want to invest in something that I don't think I'm going to get back. And it all comes down to the risk around it. So if the risk is a low barrier to entry and you can see the confidence and or you call my past clients up and they're like, yeah, no, we really did get that. Our numbers really did shift that way. Then you also have validation. And I think that's key. Every executive, it makes decisions on risk. And so you need to, when we talk about pricing, you've got to lower that risk for that greater return in order to get even from a predictive index, the people who are skeptical and the foot on the brake and risk adverse, the more you can show that credibility, the better. Make sense?
Mhm. Yes. How much weight do you think that the guarantee holds in making a sale?
I've used it twice, and one of them was Mitsubishi. So one of their individual America manufacturing. And that was just enough for me to say that and put that in writing was enough for them to go, okay, why not? We don't have anything to risk here. So
Right.
why not do that? So I would say that but don't do a guarantee if you can't actually guarantee
Can't
it.
deliver.
But I will also say that It's not just myself and the team doing the work. The company has to do the work. I'm not on site every day. So the commitment has to be, I have also said no to people who have called me because I could tell the commitment wasn't there. And they were looking for an overnight, sprinkling of the dust. And you didn't get that way overnight, and we're not going to get you out of that overnight. And if you're not going to put the work in to shift it, there's nothing that I can do without that commitment. So it does take a two-way commitment. I do want to preface that.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly you provide great ROI, you have a great offer here, and even sometimes a guarantee. Yet do you still see resistance sometimes in like paying premium fees? Why do you think that is?
If companies in the past, a couple of reasons, if it's devalued, right? If they're like, this is a nice to have. If the pain point hasn't been drawn out enough to say, if this continues, is it really painful or not? So if you haven't really matched that it's really worthy, I mean, all of us, we may want things when we go shopping, but if we, that difference between I want it and I need it, do I need it or do I want it? And which one, after I get it, am I going to be in regret or not? And so I think part of that, not part of that, a lot of that plays into it. And then the lack of commitment piece. And then the last thing I'll say is if in the past they did like one-off training, so I'll go back, sexual harassment. And that's also been something during the Me Too movement. So we need to have sexual harassment training. Great. Are you checking the box just to say I had training? Are you really going to shift what it is that you're wanting to do inside of your culture? I had a lot of construction companies call me during that. So a huge shift in construction, trying to change, the persona. So some of those people, it was a little bit harder of, and I would say, I'm not the person for you. Let me find somebody who will just do it once for you and be done, because one and done didn't do it. And so
Of course
those,
not.
I would say, are some hiccups to where if you don't have the alignment, if you've gotten it for really cheap in the past and it didn't stick, then you're not going to see value or credibility because you've never seen what right looks like. You've only seen what wrong looks like. And so you're just trying to check the box and you're not really committed to do it. And you certainly are not going to want to pay for something that you don't value.
Agreed. I know quite a few people in construction, and let's just say I don't think a 1 hour training course is going to change anything.
No, it doesn't. And for some people, if you want a BMW, but you're only willing to pay the Hyundai price, you're never going to get the BMW. You will never
Exactly.
experience the power of what it could be if you really don't see the value into it. So I would say that's where the disconnect is, and it does still happen right now because of where I am in the business, and we've been around for so long. I have a lot of my clients who recommend people who I would have never had the opportunity to talk to, quite frankly, because of the circle that they're in. They connect because colleague to colleague, they're like, what's going on? Like, why are you guys crushing it? And then they'll do the referral. It wasn't always like that, but it's like that now.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, on to the quick lightning round.
All right, go for it.
Okay, I've got 4 questions here, just quick off the top of your head, 20, 30-second answers.
All right.
All right. Okay. Biggest myth about culture consulting.
That everybody can do it.
How so?
I think a lot of people read a book and say, okay, I got it. I can go do this. It's one thing to read it and to understand it and believe it and kind of wrap your head around it. It's another thing to actually implement it. And the implementation is where everybody gets stuck, partially because they really don't know what to look for. It's like the difference between training and facilitation, completely different. There are amazing trainers, and then there's amazing facilitator that can pull on strings. Like you're pulling on strings of my questions to go deeper. So I think that people think that it's much easier than what it is. And listen, if it was that easy, wouldn't everybody have great cultures? We would have never heard the word toxic culture if it was easy to do.
Yeah. No, completely fair. Okay. One conversation that increases your perceived value.
Rephrase the question because I'm not sure.
Yeah. So when you're, pitching to a client and maybe they're resisting, what's one thing that you can say that will increase your perceived value to reframe it as more of an investment than a cost?
What did you do yesterday that made everything go well? Something around that. So asking them to stop and reflect on what was working. A lot of times people are like, Well, that's a great question. I was like, well, if you don't know what helped you and your team run faster, then how do you know to keep doing it? Or how do you know what you're not supposed to do anymore? Usually that will make people stop and think.
What is your favorite metaphor or framework that helps clients get it? Like I know you mentioned the
Hydration.
dolphins
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. That for the
yeah.
hiring, people like, okay, now yeah, I get it. Definitely that if we're talking about the initial hire on predictive index. And then the things that I've said over the years, like cultural dehydration, people usually like, what? I've never heard that term before. And it usually does engage them into conversation. And then they're like, and then I'll give them a few examples and they're like, yeah, I get it. So
Yeah,
those are usually a couple of things. Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. All right. Well, Shelley, this was outstanding. Thank you for your energy and clarity. Where could people connect with you, learn more about Premier Rapport, CPCC?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on. It was fun. And I'm on all the socials. So anything at Premier Rapport, you're going to find me, or just go to the main website. I'm all over LinkedIn. I post a lot of stuff. So any of that works to find me.
Okay, great. If this episode challenged your thinking, share it, tag Shelley with your takeaway. Until next time, I'm Jaden Parisi. This is Pipeline and People Podcast.